Welcome to Theobodium, and welcome to my review of Outbreak. First off, I want to say that I'm doing this review a little bit differently. I am playing this while I'm recording this voiceover, as opposed to doing what I would normally do, where I play something, record a voiceover, and then edit in the recording behind it, but it's just because it'll save me a little bit of time. Also, hello, vehicle. Anyway, so I want to start off this review by mentioning that I made a mistake in my first impressions video about this game mode. That mistake being... oh, hello, equipment. That mistake being that I said that I think a particular 3 objectives are always the ones you will encounter in the first 3 worlds you enter, and I was completely wrong. From my more recent experiences, I understand that which objective you encounter in each world will be completely random, besides the fact that they seem to favor not repeating the same objectives over and over again. I believe that the objectives occur in a random order that will not repeat any objectives for however many more objectives, probably not until every single other objective has been used up. The next thing that has been brought to my attention is that it's basically Warzone with zombies. Now, I've never played Warzone, so I really don't have a lot that I can say about this, and I've discovered that, if I'm not mistaken, I would have to pay money to play Warzone, and I really don't plan on doing that. So I'm good where I'm at. I will let the people who have played Warzone review that aspect of the game. But even though it is essentially what looks to be a Warzone copy, I still applaud the innovation of this game in what it means for zombies, because it really has involved a lot of innovation for the zombies game mode. And of course, talking about those innovations is what this whole video is about. That's what I'm about to be getting into, so if you are interested in this, then please stick around, because this is going to be probably a bit of a long video, because there is a lot to talk about. But I really think that this game mode is important for the zombies game mode, and I'm glad that it exists. So let's get into why. So the first obvious question that comes to my mind when talking about this is, how does the open world aspect of this affect the gameplay of zombies? And that is a very good question, and I'm going to start off with the negatives, because honestly I feel like that's just the best thing for me to do, since there are more positives than negatives in this. I want to put the negatives in the forefront so it doesn't seem like I'm forgetting about them. So first of all, the ability to roam the massive map is awesome. Free roaming a large map while constantly fighting zombies is something that I personally have wanted for a very long time in zombies. But the bad news about this is that I think it could have been done a little bit better. Personally, I find myself getting a little bit bored running around exploring the map constantly, as opposed to fighting zombies all the time, because there really aren't that many zombies whenever you're exploring. Now, this game in particular, I've actually had a little bit more fun, because the zombies do seem to be spaced out pretty well. But from past experience with this game mode, exploration normally doesn't heed a lot of combat and just heeds a lot of finding items, which is fine. I understand that's the point of the exploration, but I'm just saying that I think it could have been done a little bit better and make the whole experience of exploration a bit more exciting, as opposed to just kind of going through the motions, going in and out of places, and occasionally getting to shoot a zombie or two. Again, this match has actually proved me wrong about that fact, so maybe my previous matches have actually been a problem, or maybe they've updated already and changed the way this is working. But my past experiences have been that the exploration is a little bit boring, that there's not enough enemies to fight, and it doesn't at all feel like the original zombies. And not that it should, because I understand that this is a new game mode, but I do feel like it should have a little bit of that original zombies feel in it, into each area you go into. Like when you're just roaming in between towns, maybe you don't get bombarded by so many zombies that it'll slow your progress, but you do get bombarded by a decent amount of zombies. I would like to see that, because whenever I'm roaming in between towns, it's like there's never anything there, and unless I have a vehicle, that journey can be pretty boring. Again, this isn't a big thing, this is more of a nitpicky thing. I really get that this is just my opinion. I know that other people might have a completely different opinion, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to completely just crap on the game. I understand that this, again, is opinionated. It's just a flaw that I see with the game. So I'm most certainly not done talking about this negative aspect of the game, but I do want to take the time to segue kind of into the more positive aspects of this. So one of the positive things about this exploration is that if you're in the mood for a more relaxed zombies game mode, this is definitely for you. Like, this definitely could give you a relaxed zombies game mode where you don't have to worry about constantly shooting your way out of things, and you can just walk around, get some loot, and then occasionally go into the exciting moments of the end objectives for each world, which I will get into those, by the way, in a little bit, and I personally think that they are not at all boring and are very exciting, but that's a different story. I'm talking about the exploration right now. But the exploration is something that I think is done well in other ways. For example, I think that the exploration is kind of a secondary objective, meaning it's not required. The only thing that's required for you to progress through the game is for you to complete the objective on each map. or exfil and get the rewards for doing so. Similar to how in a normal zombies game mode, something like pack-a-punching your gun might technically be a secondary objective. You know, you're making yourself more powerful the same way it is here. And the primary objective is technically just to survive as many rounds as possible or do the Easter egg if that's what you're into doing. So when talking about primary and secondary objectives here, exploration is a secondary objective. So the fact that it's a little boring to me doesn't really matter that much because it's not the primary gameplay mechanic. I mean, it is a very big one, but it is not the purpose of playing the game. And also, I want to talk about its iteration into the game, which is actually quite good. Besides the fact that it's a little boring to me, it's actually used quite well in this game mode because if you just go for the primary objective, then you'll probably die. If you just continuously run headfirst into the objective in every single world and don't do any exploration, don't get any better guns or anything like that, then again, you'll probably die. So this secondary exploration objective is implemented into the game very well, where it's almost a suggestion. You don't have to do this exploration stuff, but you definitely can, and doing so will be helpful to your primary objective. And I think that's a very good way to integrate a secondary objective, where it's kind of like a suggestion. It's something that you definitely should and could do, but you don't have to. If you really just aren't feeling like exploring a world, which I definitely have been in the past, and you feel like you're okay enough to move forward, then you can just skip over the exploration part and move straight into the next world, and that is perfectly fine, and I like that. It's integrated very well where you have an incentive to do this secondary objective, to explore. It's not just the main objective that matters, because this helps you with the main objective, and so there's definitely an incentive to do not just the primary objective, but some secondary things as well. It's a very good way to have a secondary gameplay mechanic. You want to integrate something that the player doesn't have to do, but you want them to still use that gameplay mechanic, because obviously you didn't make it for nothing. And that's kind of the whole point of this open world zombies game mode, is that you get to explore, and it is something that I definitely like. I'm not taking back the fact that I think the exploration could be done a little bit more excitedly, but I'm still very happy about overall how they've integrated this into the game. I think they've done a good job. Applause to everyone working at Treyarch and Raven. I really think that this is a good job overall. So that was a bit of a mouthful, but I think that's everything I had to say about exploration itself. So now it's time to move on to the weapon balance. Now the pure RNG thing is a bit undermining of the weapon balance, of course, but that's just the way RNG works, because there's a chance that you can get some ridiculously good weapons super early on, and that's not exactly a bad thing, it's just pure RNG, and I'm just pointing that out because I'm currently using a tier 4 damage weapon in the first world because I got lucky enough to pick one up. And I don't think that that's exceptionally rare either. Again, not a big deal, I'm just pointing it out because I do want to get the negatives out of the way first, and RNG can undermine a little bit of what the weapon balance has to say. But other than that, it's time to get into the positives of weapon balance, because that's really the only negative that I can think of. So what specifically do I mean when I say weapon balance? Well, I mean, how do the weapons interact with the difficulty of each world that you're going into? Like, do your weapons scale well with the world that you're in? Do you spawn into World 1 with a tier 4 damage weapon, which in my case, yes, I did, or do you end up in World 5 with a tier 2 damage weapon? Like, what's going on there with how often you get certain types of weapons? What's the weapon balance like? Honestly, I would personally say that the weapon balance is pretty freaking good. I have yet to see a single tier 5 damage weapon or wonder weapon, and I've only made it to about World 6 or so, which tells me that I need to get higher into the worlds to have a better chance to get those weapons, because I assume that the chances will scale the same way that they do in the normal zombies game mode here, where the higher world you're in, the higher chance you have of getting some good stuff. So the fact that I still have room to grow when I'm in the 6th or 7th world tells me that the weapon balance is pretty good, because that means that I'm not going to be getting crap loads of good weapons early on, so much so that I can no longer grow my arsenal when I get into higher levels. I think that there's obviously still a chance that you can end up with a tier 5 weapon super early on, but I don't think that that chance is super significant, and plus, every once in a while when you do get a tier 5 when you start the game up, it'll probably just be a fun experience of you being a little overpowered for a while, and who doesn't love to be overpowered for a little bit. The next thing I want to talk about is vehicle balance, which is honestly something that I don't know if I'm fully equipped to talk about, simply because I haven't used all the vehicles in this game yet, because if I'm not mistaken, you can get a helicopter and a tank later on if you continue to move forward. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, but in the main menu, looking at like the vehicles that you can actually look at, it really seems like you might be able to get yourself a tank at some point, which would be awesome. Like, having a tank in zombies is like a dream come true for me. That would be so awesome, being able to drive one. I'm not talking about the tank in Origins, I mean drive it and shoot it would be so cool. So assuming that that is actually a thing, I think that the vehicle balance is also done pretty well. I mean, it's pretty easy to find a vehicle early on. I found a lot of vehicles like I guess I would call it the army jeep or the normal car or the snowmobile in the snow world that's always going to be there. That stuff is like pretty easy to find really anywhere within the first few worlds of the game. But I'm really excited to see if that stuff scales. Like if you get into world 10 or something like that, are you actually going to have access to that helicopter? Are you going to have access to a higher level vehicle like the dune buggy vehicle that looks like heavily armored that has a machine gun somewhere? Am I actually going to get access to that stuff, or is that reserved for other game modes? And that's the reason why it's in my customizable menu. I don't think so. I really don't think that it would be in the zombies customization menu if you couldn't get those vehicles. And the fact that I haven't seen them yet tells me that I have to work for them. I have to get pretty high in the game to actually see a tank or to see a helicopter, and I would love to see those things, honestly. I cannot describe how much I would love to use a tank or a helicopter in zombies as an actual vehicle that I can just pilot around indefinitely and use until it breaks, until I destroy it. So I really don't want to talk too much about this balance because, again, of course, I'm not really sure. I haven't gone far enough to gain access to any of these vehicles. I don't know how long it takes to gain access, but I would feel like for something like a tank, it would probably take you a pretty long time to gain access to that, and I am perfectly fine with that. So, since I just opened this loot crate over here, now it's time to talk about loot balance, actually. But I'm going to give this a second because I don't want to talk without gameplay, so I'm just going to let myself load into the next world. Welcome to Golova, and welcome to the next section of this video. So to talk about loot balance, again, I want to reference the fact that, if I'm not mistaken, it's the same with this, that the higher you go in the game, the higher level loot you're going to get. I don't have any evidence to really prove that that's true, but I really assume that it is, because why would they take that element away in this game? So the higher world you go into, the higher level loot you're going to get. And I think that that's a basic principle that just goes into the balance, which is pretty well done. It still involves RNG, so again, there are some things that could undermine the balance of loot. You get some pretty high level loot before you should, but overall, I think that it's not that big of a deal. I think that the RNG way that they've done this is pretty much the best way you can implement this with still having RNG. I also think that it's pretty nice how it gives you a steady flow of salvage. That's pretty much the only way that I know to get salvage in this game is through the loot crates, and I don't think that that's a bad thing, really. I really actually kind of enjoy that. I think it's a good way to get salvage, because salvage is kind of like a secondary thing for you to get your armor up or your weapon level up. And so I think that's kind of a good idea that they looped that together with the secondary objective of exploration through loot crates. You know, you're not going to really get salvage that much if you don't explore and don't try and find some loot crates. But if you do end up exploring, then you'll find probably plenty of salvage and you'll have plenty to get by on. But at least by my opinion, this system is not without its flaws. Again, this is completely opinionated, and honestly, I understand if no one agrees with this. But by my opinion, I would honestly prefer if there was less equipment in the loot boxes, because the way the loot boxes are done right now, they drop so much equipment that it makes me feel like equipment is just a complete abundance. But I almost feel like I wish it was more of a scarcity, like equipment was more valuable. Which is a weird thing to say, I know, but it's just my personal opinion. I feel like equipment is a pretty powerful thing, and I kind of wish that equipment was more valuable, as opposed to being something that you can just willy-nilly use, even though I still don't. Because I like it when you have to strategically use the equipment, and it really doesn't push you to strategically use your equipment. It just kind of like, hey, here's tons of equipment, just use it however you want to, and it'll help you, which is not bad necessarily. Like, it just means that it's encouraging you to use your equipment more often. But again, by my personal opinion, I would prefer if it encouraged players to use their equipment more strategically as opposed to using their equipment more frequently. Quality over quantity, I guess, is what I'm saying here, is if it encouraged that when it comes to equipment as opposed to pure quantity. Just use it as much as possible, because again, when it comes to the loot boxes, there's a lot of equipment to be had. Like, you never really run low on equipment if you are exploring. Now, if you're not, you probably will run low on equipment, but if you are actually exploring, then you're never going to run low on equipment. And I think during the main objectives, the zombies tend to drop a significant amount of stuff, including equipment and stuff like that, so again, I think that that's a personal flaw that I have with it, but again, that's opinionated. That's why I didn't talk about it in the beginning, because I don't think that that's an objective flaw. It's just my opinion. Moving on to the zombie balance. The zombie balance, what I mean by that, of course, is how much they grow in difficulty with each world, because I think they had that pretty well figured out for the zombies game mode for this game. I mean, it scales pretty well in the average zombies match on D Machina or Firebase Z, but how does that translate to this open world thing that has a completely different system? It's not round-based anymore, it's world-based. So talking about the negative first, I genuinely do think that the difficulty scales a little bit too aggressively, And I just mean a little bit, not really by much. But I do think the difficulty does scale a little bit too aggressively, especially if you're talking about a player who's been unlucky with RNG and doesn't really have that many good weapons. They're probably not going to have a good match, and that just allows a little bit too much to apply to RNG. Now, if you're set up decently, or especially if you end up lucky with RNG and get some stuff well above your pay grade for what world you're in, then you'll be perfectly fine. But if you're getting unlucky with some stuff, it'll be a lot more challenging, and maybe that's not a bad thing. You know, if someone's looking for a challenge, they can do that, but if someone's not looking for a challenge and they just get unlucky with RNG, then they might not have a fun experience. And it's not that big of a deal because it's such a slight thing. I genuinely think that it's a slight too aggressive change of difficulty, and again, this is my opinion, but I really think that, especially concerning the objectives, because of how many zombies you usually have to fight there, the difficulty can scale pretty aggressively, can become very difficult very fast. If you're not exploring and scaling yourself with that difficulty properly, and that leads in back to the fact that, you know, exploration is a secondary objective that's not required, but if you don't do it, you're really going to suffer because of how aggressively the difficulty increases. Interesting. This is the same weapon that I already have, and the same tier damage as well. But let's talk positives. I think that overall the zombie balance is pretty good. I think, again, with besides the slight too aggressive increase in the scenario where a player is not getting RNG on their side or something like that, then I think overall this is a really good system, and I think that it scales pretty well. It gets pretty intense as you go further into it, and it makes the exploration less boring the further you get into it, because the zombies become a lot more difficult to kill, and they actually become more of a threat. Whereas early on, it's a little bit boring to fight some of them. I do think that the difficulty scaling helps the exploration a lot, because it makes it more challenging. I really like a good challenge, so for me personally, the ridiculous difficulty that some of these challenges can get to whenever you begin to go into this later, especially if you're on solo, like some of the defense objectives can be really difficult, or the escort objective. Again, personally, I like that. I like a good challenge, and I really like the difficulty of these challenges. The map challenges, whenever you get up there, can really destroy you, but again, I like that. Hello, dog. So, now that we're actually in front of the Megaton, this is a perfect time to segue into the boss balance. And honestly, I don't have that much negative to say about this. Really, I don't. The boss balance is done really well. In fact, in particular, I'm going to talk about the Tempest here in a minute. What is it with the Stoner 63? So, when talking about the boss zombie balance, it's worth mentioning that I'm not talking about this guy, the eliminate high priority target. I feel like that goes more into the objective balance. He's more of an objective than he is a typical boss zombie. I'm talking about the ones that are littered throughout the maps. And honestly, I love them. I really think that what they've done here is really cool, and that was not a strategic use of a Molotov. I will point out that I didn't do a good job of that. I think that these guys being littered throughout the map is honestly really cool, because each and every single one of these boss zombies is significantly different. You have probably the easiest one to fight, which would be this guy, honestly. The Mangler, by my opinion, is the easiest one to fight, poses the least threat in any situation. He doesn't do anything particular against vehicles to prevent them. As a player, he can be a bit of a nuisance whenever you're fighting him one-on-one, but in the end, he's not that hard. You just knock off his armor. If you know how to kill him, he's not that big of a deal. He's just your basic boss. You know, whenever I see him, it's kind of just like, he's just kind of a nuisance. He's just kind of there. He's not really going to get in my way that much. He just takes a little bit more bullets than the other zombies. He does have a ranged attack, which you might have to worry about if you're not careful, but for the most part, I don't really think it's going to get you down, unless you make some serious mistakes. And again, this guy is not a good example of a Mangler because he's also the boss for this map, so I'm not comparing him to the normal Mangler again, because he has obviously a big health boost and a big damage boost probably. So I'm not taking him into account when I'm talking about this Mangler. Also, to reiterate the point that these main objectives can be fun, I love the amount of zombies that I'm currently fighting. I really love this whole thing that's happening. But moving on from the Mangler, let's go to the Mimic. The Mimic is another just kind of nuisance zombie. As you just saw, I took him out pretty easily, in the sense that he's not really going to cause you that much trouble. He's not a big deal. He's just, oh, hello Mangler, boss. But the whole thing about the Mimic is that he's really not going to cause you that much trouble. He can surprise you, maybe give you a jump scare or two, you know, because he just shows up out of nowhere sometimes. I swear if this is the Stoner. It's the Stoner. But similar to the Mangler, he's just a nuisance, and honestly, I probably should have started with him because he's even weaker than the Mangler, actually. He's really easy to kill. Just hit him in the head and he'll go down in a few seconds. He's just fast, and that's the only thing about him. He can grab you also and disrupt your ability to fight other things, which is maybe a little bit more challenging than the Mangler, but overall he's really just kind of a little bit of a nuisance and not that big of a deal. But from there, let's move on to talk about the Megaton. Now I honestly wish, oh, here's a good example of a normal Mangler. If I can get a little bit closer to him, then I can just load him full of bullets and kill him really quickly. See, it's really not that big of a deal, he's just a little bit of a nuisance. Now the Megaton, which I fought earlier in this match, is a bit more of a challenge. He's one of the ones that might actually cause you some issues because the Megaton actually has some big guns. He has some pretty powerful ranged abilities, and if he's left unchecked, and in the map Die Rise, if he was left unchecked and you had tons of them on the field at a time, it would seriously cause you some issues. You would end up with a big problem on your hands because you would have tons of like split Megatons or something like that all shooting ranged blasts at you. And seriously, that ranged assault can really cause some issues. Speaking of the Megaton, here we go. But again, with a Pack-a-Punch tier 4 damage weapon on only the second world, it doesn't seem like he's that much of a nuisance at all. He really isn't. I can really take care of him pretty quickly, and it makes me wonder if the Megaton will be a lot more challenging in future maps. I think by far the Mimic is probably the easiest to take out, actually, now that I'm really thinking about it. But the Megaton, if you get multiple of them at the same time, can be a little bit more of a nuisance. Again, I don't think that that's going to happen in this one. I really don't think that you're going to get a ton of Megatons. It doesn't seem like you will anyways. It just kind of seems like with the Megaton, you're just going to get one at a time in this world. But that's fine with me. It just means that he might be a little bit more of a nuisance than the Mangler, but he's still just going to be his own thing. Oh, and then there's that guy, but I'll talk about him in a minute. Actually, you know what? I might go ahead and segue into him, and then I'll talk about the Tempest last, just because I honestly didn't expect the Krasny, that's what it is, the Krasny Soledad to show up already. So let's talk about the Krasny Soledad. We're pretty much done with the Megaton. He's a little bit more of a nuisance. Krasny Soledad is the closest thing you get to like an actual boss, unless you're talking about the actual boss objective. This guy is a lot tougher than the other guys, as you can already tell, and he does some pretty significant damage. He's more like a boss fight, and I enjoy that. He is not more than a nuisance. He's an actual challenge, even on this second world here, with his gun. I mean, I'm not really having that much trouble with him, but I'm saying that you can see in comparison to the others how much trouble he'll be when I get into higher worlds, and none of my guns are doing a lot of damage to any of these guys. Krasny Soledad is a good example of a big buff, like tank zombie, that you really have to focus, especially if you have a team going, you have to focus to take him out. Make sure that you don't mess up and get your entire team killed by ignoring him too much, but also don't focus fire on him only, because boss zombies have a tendency to do that. They draw your attention to them only, and then you end up going down. So I think he's a pretty good balance. You encounter him every once in a while, and he's actually a pretty good challenge, but he's pretty rare. So again, unless you're talking about higher worlds, in which case I might be wrong, it's not like they're going to bombard you with him. Only encountered 1 or 2 of him on any map that I've played, maybe 3 on some of the higher worlds. But point is that the game doesn't bombard you with him, and I think that he's well balanced for that reason. Also, what is in here? Oh, it's zombie essence. Interesting. Also, I didn't realize that Samantha thing is like timed for you to get points out of it, so oh well. Guess I failed that objective. Now, all of this stuff I've talked about, well, there's one weakness to like all of these bosses, which is vehicles. A lot of them can't do that much to you in vehicles, including the Krasny, because he's relatively slow besides his jetpack. He can just kind of, jetpack up to you, but other than that, it's not the hardest thing in the world to get past any of these guys if you have a vehicle in your hands. You can just drive right past him, move along, and it's not that big of a deal. Which is why, honestly, another reason why I wanted to save the Tempest for last is because he's kind of like a balance for that. It makes the vehicle driving, which I'm currently doing in a weird way, no longer the end-all be-all way to avoid those bosses if you don't feel like fighting them. Why? Because the Tempest can one-shot like any vehicle. Any vehicle that I've been in, as soon as the Tempest shows up, it goes into critical damage if he hits it with one of his blasts, and it's pretty hard to dodge his blasts sometimes in a vehicle, because they're pretty fast-moving balls of electricity, and it can very quickly ruin your day if you're using a vehicle, especially if you really like that vehicle. Again, I don't know if that'll translate later, who knows, if tanks and helicopters will also be one-shot by this guy. But as it currently stands, pretty much everything I've ever driven has been one-shot by a Tempest. It doesn't explode immediately, yet again, it just kind of enters into the critical damage thing, which means it will blow up eventually. And honestly, I think that's a pretty good counter for vehicles, for them being an end-all be-all escape method With those guys, you can't. You actually have to get out of your vehicle and fight them and park it pretty far away, probably, if you actually want your vehicle to live. The reason why I say all that is because I think that they're a pretty good balance. A lot of them are genuinely pretty good for ground battles. Like, they add a little bit of challenge, but they're not too difficult. They don't make you just want to quit the game or anything like that because you're going to keep dying. Especially for skilled players, you know, they're not that big of a deal. But they do add a bit of a challenge and fun into the game, especially during exploration, which I feel like desperately needs that. And the Tempest is a counter for vehicles, and you've got a lot of other things which are just counters for you on the ground. But I think it's cool that a little bit of everything you use, whether it be vehicles or really powerful weapons against something like the Krasny, doesn't matter. They're all resistant to something. Like, that Krasny is really going to be resistant to your weapons no matter what you use. It's going to be challenging to kill him, and you just have to basically outlast him. You just have to be smart about how you fight him. You can't just go in with a big gun and expect to win. And with the Tempest, you can't expect to just run them over and win, because they're pretty weak zombies. You could probably kill them pretty quickly if you were to run over them, but I dare anyone to try and run over a Tempest with a vehicle. It's possible, sure, but the vehicle will most likely die before you ever get a hit on it. So moving on from bosses, I want to talk about the general and overall difficulty increase, but to do that, I still want to mention one more thing, which is obviously something I haven't mentioned yet, is I guess I would call them heavy zombies. Now, what I mean by heavy zombies is like the dogs. You've got your plague hounds, you've got now these explosive hellhounds, which I personally like a lot, and they add another significant challenge to the game. In fact, especially the dogs do, because the dogs are always pretty powerful. And I think it's interesting that the hellhounds always come in very significant packs. You never really just find one, you're always going to have a bunch. Oh, here's the Tempest that I spoke of earlier. Actually, you know what, just to prove a point, I'm going to go hop in a vehicle and try and run over that Tempest. Hey, I did it, but oh, okay, so running over the Tempest still immediately makes your vehicle, like, go into self-destruct mode. Interesting, so you don't just have to be hit by their blast. Running over it does that. So running into a Tempest is like vehicle suicide. I see. The Hellhounds especially can easily overwhelm you. The Plague Hounds, not too bad, you just have to stay out of the mist after you kill them. But the Hellhounds, because they explode on you, and they can cause some serious issues for you if you're not careful. I honestly like that a lot, and I think they're a pretty good, you know, difficulty check. Alright, gold loot chest open. Wow, those Tempests were really on me that time. And I think the Hellhounds, obviously they increase in health as you continue, but I also think that they increase in number, and that's a good thing, because again, one of their biggest advantages against the player is overwhelming the player with a lot of fire damage, and again, I like that. The fire damage is a lot more damaging than the poison of the Plague Hounds. The Plague Hounds are more of just a nuisance. Then you've got these guys, which I of course want to talk about. The everyday zombie variant, these guys right here, these armor zombies. Their introduction is a good change of pace. You have your normal zombie, which is still really easy to kill. Then you have the more challenging Juggernaut zombies. Again, it makes exploration a lot more fun to have the more challenging zombies out there, and it makes it increase in entertainment as the game goes forward, and also increase in challenge. I think it's a really good addition to have these guys here as well. And of course, a lot of these are just things that have come from previous maps. I'm not necessarily saying that these things are original. I'm simply talking about their balance relative to this game mode. And I think they have quite a good balance. These Juggernaut zombies, or I guess armored zombies, and then eventually they become Juggernaut zombies when they become full armored and just charge at you full speed. And their number and amount of armor increases as the rounds go on. And of course their health does too, because they're still a normal zombie underneath all the armor. So it's another layer of challenge that increases with the game, and included with all the stuff with the bosses that I talked about and how they become more numerous and also increase in health as time goes on, and the zombies themselves and their basic increase, all that stuff works out for a very good, and also, as I mentioned before, a little bit too aggressive, but very good overall balance when it comes to the difficulty increase of this game. And the last thing that I want to talk about regarding gameplay is variety and replayability, something that I have talked about before on this channel that is very important when it comes to a zombies game, because that's the entire thing. You know, zombies is just replayed over and over and over again. So how different is each match? How replayable is this game? And by my opinion, it's pretty freaking replayable. Similar to the way the normal zombies mode is replayable for this game, the RNG stuff, you know, that makes the normal game mode pretty replayable. And I understand that that's one of the biggest reasons why the RNG is here. On top of that, you also get the RNG in different areas, like the actual maps that you start on, the order that the maps you're going to go through, that's also RNG based. And then you also have what objectives you're going to be doing, which is also RNG based. And in a single match, I've yet to repeat a single objective. So I don't know how many objectives there are, but it really seems like they have a lot. And the fact that that is RNG based means that there's going to be a lot of different combinations of difficulties for the objectives that you're doing, like this escort one, which is going to be a lot easier than when I first did it, because I did it on like the 5th world. And I think that's a good thing. The RNG with the objectives themselves means that there's a lot of variety in replayability in this. The maps that you get each objective on is typically going to be different. There is a lot going for this game's variety and replayability, so as a basic standpoint, I say that it has pretty good variety and replayability. You can replay this game a lot and not really get the same experience, and to add to that, it takes a long time to play a single match, so the chances of you getting tired of this game mode entirely, like quickly at least, is not likely. It's going to take you a little while to get tired of this game mode, I think. Unless you just genuinely get very bored like I do sometimes with the exploration. And now moving on to the final point really that I have for this video, which is about the maps themselves. I'm done with gameplay. I've said everything that I really have to say about gameplay and how it's iterated and everything like that. Now it's time to talk about the maps themselves. And overall, I think the maps are well done. I think that it's cool to have these massive maps that have very different aesthetics to explore. And the fact that there's 3 of them and they're done in a different order whenever you're playing the game adds to that variety and replayability. And they're big enough to where I never want to explore the whole thing, although this map in particular, Alpine, first time I played it I did explore it the entire way, but I haven't done it multiple times, so it's not like I have a layout of this map in my mind. And the size of the maps keeps me wondering, you know, where I'm going. I don't really know where I am at all times, and it keeps me on my toes. Hello, Mangler. That is a strategic use of a Molotov. I enjoy the variety of the 3 maps. Eventually I will get tired of them, so you know, if they are going to do another installment of this, I would enjoy to see, obviously, new maps. Obviously. That's just a thing that happens, though. You know, that's why you need variety and replayability in the first place, is so that you don't get tired of maps so quickly. Whenever I was first writing the script for this video, I actually really did want to talk a lot more about each individual challenge for each map, like the escort that I just did, which is one of my favorites, by the way. But I just kind of realized that that would take a lot of in-depth of me playing this, which I plan on doing, and I might do a video dedicated to breaking down each one of those challenges on their own, which would be a much shorter video. But I just really didn't want to group it in with this video because it just didn't seem like a good idea to just kind of throw that in here with this stuff, especially with how long this video is already. So I've decided also to end off this video, I'm going to be blowing up the beacon and doing my first exfil on this map. But I'm only going to be going to the 3rd world here because it's already been an hour. I don't feel like doing a lot more than that. Honestly, this exfil isn't that hard, and that's fine, because it's only the 3rd world, so I wouldn't expect it to be. But, yeah, I've actually had some fun playing this match, and I thoroughly enjoy this game mode. Probably we'll talk about exfil at some point later on as one of the objectives, because it's not really something I want to dig into with this, and it's also, this is the first exfil I've ever done, so I don't really have that much to say about the exfil for this. So if you'd like to hear a breakdown of each individual objective, well, first I need to get them all, which is another thing. I haven't experienced all of them, I don't think. So I will be playing this game mode more, and if you would like to see that, then let me know, and I will do that in the future. With all that said, it's about time for me to sign off. So if there's anything that you want to add down in the comments, if there's anything that I missed or you think I was wrong about or right about and you want to agree with me, all of that's perfectly fine. I encourage you to go down in the comments and let me know. As with any other review type video I do, I would love for this to be a conversation, and I would love to learn what you guys think about the same subject. If you did like the video, then go hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like it, or let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk with you in the next one.